address them. First, candidate gone.
Well, the number one job of a representative in the United States House is to protect our national security. That's it. That's really the number one priority and the number one job according to the Constitution. Now, how do we protect our national security? The best way is to promote economic security. And when we have a shrinking middle class, we're favoring the 1%, we're not protecting either our national security or our interests at all. Look at the sequester. Look, what that did was, it was a grand bargain to give the tax breaks the billionaires didn't deserve or didn't need, the Bush tax cuts. To keep those in place, we ended up with the sequester. And now, as a result, we're facing cuts to the CDC, to NIH, potential problem with Ebola. So what we have to do is remember that national security is economic security. So I would close corporate tax loopholes on companies that are shipping jobs overseas. We can do this in trade agreements like NAFTA and CAFTA. The second thing I would do is increase the minimum wage immediately to up to $9 an hour and then phase it up to $12 an hour over 2 years. That would put more money in people's pockets. Minimum wage earners spend money. They buy stuff from corporations. The money trickles up. Trickle down has not worked. It has never worked. Money always goes the other way. And then the third thing that I would do is better fund early childhood development. Because if we have an educated workforce, we have better economic stability. And funding early childhood development will lead to what? It will lead to more people who are educated and able to work and compete in the global marketplace, and fewer people incarcerated. Those three things are the top priorities when I get elected next Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Hildebrandt.
Okay, there's many things that we need to do legislatively immediately. We need to legalize industrial hemp. We need to put in legislation also about the tax structure. Legalize all plants. They gave me this last time. I said, well, you have one thing. Well, here I'm giving three. Okay, so legalize all plants. All right, that covers that. That covers the marijuana, that covers the drug war, most of the drug war. And legalize industrial hemp and revert the tax structure back to what it was like in the 60s. Okay, now we get into the fun stuff. This is the reason why I'm running up here, and I think I'm the best candidate. Things go much deeper than what you're seeing. Professor Noam Chomsky has said that we live entangled in webs of endless deceit in a highly indoctrinated society where elementary truths are easily buried. Why is all this money going to the military-industrial complex? Well, let me tell you something. There was an act in 1947, the National Security Act, that created a secret government. It exists. It's not a conspiracy theory. You can look up Bill Moyer's special on it. And they act outside of the Constitution. Senator Inouye said they have their own Air Force, their own Navy, and their own fundraising mechanism. Now they're not having bake sales, are they, folks? So they have been tied to the drug war, and that's probably why we really invaded Afghanistan. So we need somebody who's going to know a little bit about the secret government and will really dive in there and tackle some of those issues and not be scared to. And I'm one of those people, because the secret government has gotten totally out of hand. They're even involved in weather manipulation. You can look up Senate Bills 517 and House Bill 2995, weather manipulation without public oversight.
Thank you. Candidate Jones.
Yes, I think the most dangerous thing facing our country right now is our debt. It stands at almost $18 trillion. Over 200 years ago, Jefferson questioned whether it was legal and moral to tax future generations. He had a real problem with incurring debt that couldn't be paid back right away. Now we're not just taxing a couple future generations, we're taxing many generations in the future. If you hear the word trillion and billion tossed around so much, people, after a while, it doesn't mean much to you. But let me tell you the difference between a billion and a trillion. A billion seconds ago was 32 years ago.
Right.
A trillion seconds ago was 32,000 years ago. and we owe almost $18 trillion. The only way, if we don't stop spending, which is my #1 priority, if we don't stop spending and cut the size of government, we will either default on that debt, or the government will have to inflate the money to where it's nearly worthless to pay it off. So there are no other options. We either default or we inflate our way out. Our economy would do much better with much smaller government. There would be more jobs. I disagree with Mr. Gahn on the minimum wage. I think it's counterproductive. It hurts people that are trying to get entry-level jobs, and only 1/3 of workers in this country make minimum wage. It's an entry-level wage. The reason I'm against it is the government should not have the power to interfere in private contracts between two people. If I agree to do something for you for a certain price, the government should not intervene. Thank you.
Thank you. And now an opportunity for a response. We'll start with candidate Gahn.
Well, thank you for your point there, Mr. Jones. The leaner and more efficient government is often the goal of the Democrats, despite the rhetoric. And that is my goal, is to make government leaner and more efficient. Now, as far as our debt, the way to bring down our debt is to ask the big corporations, multinational energy corporations, Wall Street, and billionaires who have benefited the most from our system to pay a little bit more of their fair share. Increasing the minimum wage, that may seem like a drop in the bucket, but we have a situation where the top 1% have way too much power, and that is why they're running up our debt. I could tell you, we've identified $1 trillion that we could cut out of the defense budget immediately and still protect our nation in a manner that upholds our Constitution. So there are many ways that we can cut spending, but we need to cut it from going to the 1%, rather than putting it all on the backs of students, working people like myself, veterans, seniors. So we can make cuts, but we can also ask people to pay a little bit more of their fair share and bring down the deficit while creating clean energy jobs, creating higher paying wage jobs, and so we can do cuts and increase some of the tax base. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Hildebrandt.
Okay, well, again, with the debt, we just need to revert the tax structure back to what it was like in the 60s. It's not that, hard to do. We can get out of this debt. I mean, the Bush tax cuts alone cost trillions. Well, he just brought it from, let me give you a quick history. When I was born under Eisenhower, the wealthiest of income earners were taxed 91% of their highest income. Kennedy hacked it to 70%. Ron hacked it to 50, then he took it to 28. Senior Bush knew, read my lips, and he had to raise them because there was just no way he could survive on that. So he raised it to 39.6. It remained there through the Clinton years, and then it was lowered to 35 flat under W. Finally, that was raised to 39.6. Still a long ways from 70, isn't it? Which it was all the way until the 80s. So you want to deal with that debt, get them to pay their fair share as far as minimum wage. Yeah, let's take care of that. An ideal world, I hear what Paul is saying, but we've given so many benefits to these people who need nothing. We need to get their benefits away and have people surviving. I know people who work full-time and they're collecting welfare. That's not right either. Okay, so stop funding the military-industrial complex. And I'm not saying veterans' rights, give them their rights. But enough with Lockheed Bowen and all this stuff. They don't need our money, and we're subsidizing them.
Thank you. Candidate Jones.
Yes, the problem is not that the government doesn't have enough money coming in. The problem is that the government spends too much money. The Cato Institute identified over 100 departments and programs and commissions that could be eliminated, saving $200 billion a year, and nobody would know these departments were gone. They're outdated, some of them 30 and 40 years old, but being part of a bureaucracy, they never disappear. I heard that there was one department that wanted to close down because they just didn't have anything to do, they'd outlived their usefulness, and Congress wouldn't let them. We have to take a cold hard look at what we're spending and stop it. It's every penny the government spends comes out of your wallet. It comes out of a working man or woman's wallet. That's the only source of money for the federal government. And they spend it like drunken sailors on leave. There is nothing they won't spend money on. They keep coming up with more and more things to do with your money. So I would never vote to raise taxes on anyone. We give far too much of our money in taxes now. We have to cut spending.
Thank you. And now I'll ask my good league colleagues to bring forward some questions from the audience, and we'll have an opportunity to read some of those and get responses. And that's all, assuming that I can read these. Okay. And so this will be question number 5. We'll be starting with candidate Hildebrandt, going in that same order. If you had been able to vote on some kind of health care plan, what would it be?
Public option. Public option, it would have kept everybody off the table, all the middlemen out of the deal, and it would have covered everyone. That was what we needed. This guy mandated corporate insurance. That is insanity. And I used to be a practitioner. When I started, Medicare was one of the worst insurances. In the end, it was like, oh good, a Medicare person's coming in. Why? It's because all the profiteer companies kept getting worse and worse and worse. And you know something, the U.S. has nothing to brag about. Do you know our life expectancy is in the high 40s? I mean, Chomsky criticized it when it was in the low 20s. Now it's in the high 40s, or at least it was when I last did my book update a couple years back. Now you can't blame that totally on medicine, but you partially can. And you know, when there's been doctor strikes, the mortality rates drop. So, you know, we're not doing a lot of good. And that's another thing with the drug war, too. You got the pharmaceutical companies fighting this. I remember Elaine and I, we don't have television, but we were at a rest stop, and we saw this anti-marijuana commercial. At the end, they go, brought to you by, it was some, pharmaceutical company. When you put profit and medicine don't mix, you know, because you start seeing an almighty dollar above that person. I never did that. I wasn't all that wealthy either, but I had a practice. And it's something that, you know, here Germany they have enough money to send their kids to university for nothing. And here we are struggling here with debt forever. And, you know, there's so many answers, and the stress too. Stress and illness are well established. What about the financial stress that everybody's under because of these tax cuts? We need to revert them back to what they were. Remember, people make their money 2 avenues only: earth and human resources. We're not importing either from Mars.
Thank you. Candidate Jones.
Yes, I think the solution to the health care problem, the health insurance problem, is free markets. If people could buy whatever policy suited them instead of a government-mandated policy, or not buy a policy at all, and states stopped restricting their citizens from buying insurance out of state, that is a big scam that helps the insurance companies and the politicians in the state. They only allow certain insurance companies to operate. Some states with the highest premiums, like New York and New Jersey, have minimum requirements for their policies that are just ridiculous and make their policies much more expensive than they need to be. I recognize that the needy need health care, and I'm all for helping the needy. I think without this huge bureaucracy that the Affordable Care Act is going to become, the best way to do that would be with vouchers. Let the needy go to the doctor of their choice or the hospital of their choice, get the treatment of their choice, and the taxpayers will pay it. We owe that to people that can't help themselves. For the rest of us, if we want insurance, we should be able to buy any policy from any company in the country.
Thank you. Candidate Gahn.
I think actually Paul Jones makes a very reasonable argument about the balance between marketplace insurance solutions to the healthcare problem. Let's face it, in 1972, Richard Nixon ended up coming up with the idea that ended up going to the Heritage Foundation and then being implemented by Governor Romney in the state of Massachusetts, and then became the Affordable Care and Patient Protection Act. So it came from a conservative idea. It came from a conservative mindset and a conservative place. I would have stood, to answer your question, I would have stood alongside Dennis Kucinich and favored public option. However, we had partisanship and gridlock in 2009. We had it even worse in 2010. I think we need to get beyond partisanship and gridlock and be able to bring reasonable minds to the table who want market-based solutions, as well as people who would propose more socialized solutions. Now, we're behind 53 other nations that have essentially a public option or socialized medicine. Canada, a lot of countries in Europe have this. For some reason, we ended up with a conservative plan that was voted on by hardly any conservatives. It was almost by party line it was passed, the Affordable Care Act. And now it's being beaten into the ground so much by my Republican incumbent opponent and his faction in Washington that they've weakened it and made it into a bigger bureaucracy and made premiums go up higher than they should, and we need to actually let it work. So I would have put together a more bipartisan approach to begin with, but what we've got right now is something that has cut the problem in half. We're down to about 20 million people who don't have insurance.
Thank you. Now an opportunity for response. Candidate Hildebrandt.
Okay. You can't compromise. I know we have this gridlock and stuff, but you can't compromise. I mean, if I was told, well, you know, the insurance company they want you to take this 32-ounce S-wing and smack every 10th patient. You know, you just gotta do this because everybody else is. No, Kucinich needed to stand up more, and that's where I do have a disagreement with Lawrence, because you can't give into this corporate insurance. You have to just stand your ground, and those people need to be let out of office, all of them. Please look up Charlie Reese's article, 545 people. He gives a strong argument that a lot of our problems come down to those 545 people. 468 of those people's seats are up for grabs on November 4th, and I think in a more rational world, that would be the focus of reasonable people. I'm looking for one seat, but if I get in there, I'm not gonna compromise because I don't hit people with hammers. Okay, and that's what they're asking me to do. Well, just do this and so many people will. I can't give it to a Republican. You know, let them all go. Fire all of them. Okay, there's nobody in Congress who deserves their job right now, not one. Okay? So we need to get outsiders in there. We live at the height of the information age. We cannot let a censoring media misguide us at the height of the information age. The stakes are too high right now.
Thank you. Candidate Jones.
Yes, I'll be the first to admit that free markets are not perfect. They take a long time to adjust. They make corrections, but they're far superior to central planning by some government. If you look at car insurance, we all buy car insurance, we shop around for it. There's ads on TV for it all the time. The Geico fellow, you know, and save your 15% in 15 minutes. And it works out pretty well. Excuse me, there's no government interference. So free markets and competition will keep the prices of premiums down. Getting rid of regulations that insurance companies have to insure for every conceivable thing, whether you need it or not. Like some men have to have a policy that covers a woman's operation or something. It's just ridiculous. We need to use our head, quit playing politics with it, and let the free markets work as well as they can. And again, take care of the needy. We deserve, we have to do that.
Thank you. Candidate Gahn.
Well, you know, 92% of incumbents in Congress get reelected every year. So that's one of the problems, and I agree with Ken on that issue. That's one of the reasons I'm running, because people are sick and tired of business as usual, And yet, year after year, I mean, these Pew and Gallup polls were done 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, where they were saying that they didn't like anyone in Congress. 80% of Americans didn't like any congressman or woman. And yet 92% continue to get reelected. That is the problem. And it's big money in politics. That's a problem. Now, here's what I'd say about, can we compromise? Yes. Yes, you bet we can. Because you know what? I've seen people mediate couples who have so much disagreements between them that they want to cut their house in half with a chainsaw. And divorce mediation works. And they get to an agreement that's in the best interest of their children, the best interest of their financial stability. If they can do it with couples, we can use the same techniques to solve our problems with gridlock in Washington. I will be somebody who will mediate and not instigate in Washington. Look at what they did to the Affordable Care Act. They instigated by shutting down the government because they didn't get what they wanted. That's not working. We need something better. This is America, people.
Thank you. Now, question 6, also from the audience. What is your position in preventing gun violence? And we will start with candidate Jones.
Preventing gun violence. We have to have checks in place to try to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and the mentally unstable. But I've yet to see a proposal that would do that and still allow law-abiding citizens to own guns. There is no cure-all. It's like the immigration problem. We've got 12 million immigrants, undocumented immigrants. It's too many to send back. We've got 100 million guns. It's too many to take away. They're here and we have to deal with it. Unless the Constitution is changed, we have the constitutional right to keep and bear arms. You are always going to have a situation where the wrong person gets a hold of a gun for the wrong reason. There's no legislation that I'm aware of that can ever prevent that. We need education, we need gun safety in the home, but we can't restrict law-abiding citizens from their constitutional rights.
Thank you. Candidate Gone.
Well, running as a Democrat with the Democratic nomination, I talk to people of all types within the Democratic Party who have all different views. I went into a high school, Brookville High School in Lynchburg the other day, and I was with a Democrat from Campbell County who said, well, we need to have teachers armed. I disagree. I think that we can come up with common sense proposals that 98% of us as Americans agree on, background checks, so that we keep guns out of the hands, as Mr. Jones was saying, keep guns out of the hands of violent criminals, the mentally ill, and I would add to that, terrorists. That's what these background checks would accomplish. And yet we cannot get past partisanship and gridlock in Washington to pass a basic, agreeable, commonly accepted background check bill. Now, I would also go a little further and say we have had an assault rifle ban for years and years and years. It may not have saved a measurable amount of lives, but it did pass at a time when there was less gridlock and less partisanship than we have now. And if we can get beyond that, get to a point where we can agree on things and work together toward real solutions, I would be open to that, to reinstituting that type of assault rifle ban. Because I don't think it's necessary. And by the way, the Constitution, the Second Amendment, I am a Second Amendment supporter. I am a pro-Second Amendment Democrat, but it does say a well-regulated militia. The word regulated is in there for a reason. Look at the Act of 1792, the Militia Act, that Washington signed.
Thank you. Candidate Hildebrandt.
Okay, regarding guns, I feel that there should be no restrictions, and I think that the media, once again, are taking something, I'm not saying it's not a problem, but consider this. In the hour we've been sitting here, 1,000 children have died of neglect, just for what a fraction of our Pentagon budget could cover. Now, do you think these people really care if they don't care about them? That's a holocaust of children every 250 days because our priorities lie elsewhere. They're real. You know, I mean, how would we explain this to a superior intelligence? If you want to kill people, you can kill them in a car, and kill them in a number of ways. As far as mental health, that worries me because that field is so unscientific. If you laugh, you're manic. If you frown, you're depressive. I mean, they have a categorization for every damn human behavior there is, okay? So I don't like that because everybody could qualify as being mental. So I don't like them taking guns on that account at all. And as far as our national security, there's so many other issues that we don't have national security. I'll probably touch on some of them in closing, but there's a lot that we don't know about our society, and I invite you to look at my YouTube site, Dr. Ken Hildebrandt. It's there, and there's some good videos from a citizen hearing in Washington, D.C. last year about extraterrestrial visitation. Yes, that's right, and the amount of evidence is just unbelievable. There's one guy up there, you can look at his testimony. He kept it from his wife for 39 years. He said some lights came and nuclear silos were just knocked out one by one. There's a lot we don't know.
Thank you. And now an opportunity for response on this question. Candidate Jones?
Yes, Chicago leads the nation in gun murders, and yet they have the most draconian gun laws in the nation. Their criminals commit crimes. They commit rape, they do carjackings, they murder, they kidnap, they steal. What makes you think they're going to obey a gun law? They break every other law there is. So you can write the harshest gun law you want. The criminals do not obey those. So, and it shows in cities like Chicago and Washington, D.C. Those gun laws do no good at all. They've got high crime rates and draconian gun laws. So if there was a magic law that could be passed that the criminals would obey, I would go for it, but I've yet to see it.
Thank you. Candidate Gahn.
You know, actually, it's a good point that criminals do break laws. That's why we have a representative republic, because we need to live under rule of law, because there should be consequences for breaking laws. Yes, criminals break laws. Look at California. They have some of the most progressive gun laws in the country. And when they were instituted and enacted, they have one of the most advanced assault rifle bans in the country. And when they were instituted, these laws actually led to a dramatic reduction in gun deaths. So we have every evidence showing that, you know, I'm running a campaign not based on money and power. I'm basing my entire campaign on data-driven ideas, because that's what we need more of in Washington, is people with ideas. And what happens all too often is good ideas end up dying out in Washington. And so, you know, I think that the number one thing that I would do is really reduce the impact of criminal behavior in total by getting to the root problem, which is funding early childhood development, putting our children on a path toward better social skills, better behavioral patterns, better educational habits. That will have a ripple effect, and getting to the root issue will have long-term effects to get to the solution of these problems in this country.
Thank you. Candidate Hildebrandt.
Okay. We just can't keep allowing a small minority of the population to keep putting profit over people. And this is what's happening in Washington. I mean, you have one side, the Republicans, that say, well, you know, you can't compromise when the one side says, well, we want to hurt people and put profit over people first. How can you compromise with that? You've got to draw the line and say, no. You know, I'm not going to compromise when it comes to human life. And so I really feel that, once again, we really need to have representation in Washington that will not compromise with these other people, that will call it as it is and speak to the other 434 out there and say, look, as Noam Chomsky has said, again, sometimes we buck heads. It's not like I quote him all the time. He's a good friend of mine, but I think he likes me because we do this sometimes, but always friendly. But these problems, they're created by us, and we just can't continue them to continue. Like what Noman said is, you're responsible for the predictable consequences of your actions. And that's what I'm going to point to those other 434 and say, look at what you're doing, how you're compromising with people's lives. Stop it.
Thank you. Now question 7, also from the audience. What is your position on climate change? And we'll begin with candidate Gomer.
We have a faction in Washington that doesn't believe that climate change is real. They're denying this. They're denying it exists. Why? Because they want to let big corporations, multinational energy companies, dictate and determine our environmental policies. They want to dismantle the EPA. They want to let them make hay while the sun shines without any regard to our most precious and valuable and vital resources here in our it's our land is really what we need to leave our future. So I'm somebody who believes that we need to strengthen environmental protections. We need to fight global climate change and global warming by basically following the Kyoto Protocol. And I would say that we need to get into, people elected into Congress right now don't have any concern about the future. That's the number one problem. They're sitting there thinking about the short-term interest all the time. And so we've got a situation where it all begins with you folks